to sort of talk a little bit about two things. One, I'll talk about my Navy past, and then talk about the current future, because, the current day and the future about Palm Springs. Like our fireman here, I grew up in Arkansas, and my father had graduated from high school in 1942. Fortunately, my grandmother was on the draft board in Tuckerman, Arkansas, so she was able to get him in the Navy, and he didn't have to go in the Army. So my father was in the war, in World War II, he was in the Navy, and my uncles were all in the Navy. So I grew up hearing about the Navy. So as a kid in Arkansas, I wanted to get out of Arkansas. So, but the sea always had an appeal to me for some reason, and I applied for an appointment to Annapolis from my congressman and my senator, and fortunately I was able to get one. It was really hard in those days to get an appointment to Annapolis because it was 1967, and the Vietnam War was going really hard and heavy, and a lot of people wanted, the draft was going on, so a lot of people wanted to go to Annapolis or West Point or the Air Force Academy. And I remember my congressman said, well, I've got 120 people that want an appointment, and I have 2 openings. So I thought, this is never going to happen, but never give up. So what they did is they did a test, which was a civil service exam, and they narrowed it down to about 20 of us, to the top people who scored on that. And then they had us all go for a physical, and then between all the testing and the physical and all, they narrowed it down to 10. Out of 120, they narrowed it down to 10, and they took the records for the 10 of us, they gave them to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and they said, pick the 2 you want. So when I got the letter that I was going, I was like astounded. But that was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life, and it changed me entirely. One thing that was really interesting about the Navy, and all of you know, is that the Navy is like a family. And although I was from Arkansas and didn't have any officers in my family, any relatives that had been officers, as soon as I went there, a lot of my classmates were sons of officers and grandsons of officers and great-grandsons of officers, and they had been many generations of Navy. But I remember I was so inspired because my roommate's father's first commanding officer that's how the Navy is, you have all these relationships. He was Thomas Burton Clackering, class of 27, and he had retired as a 2-star admiral with 3 Navy Crosses, 2 Silver Stars, and a Bronze Star. And he was commanding officer of the USS Guardfish in World War II, which was one of the most famous submarines of World War II. And they sort of adopted me. They lived in Annapolis. They sort of adopted me my plebe year. And for the next 4 years, I had a room at their house. They took care of me, and I really learned so much about the Navy. What's really sort of funny, I think about now, though, is Uncle Bert's ring. This is my academy ring. It says 72 on it. And I remember in 1968, when I was a plebe, I used to look at Uncle Bert's ring. And they had me call him Uncle Bert and Aunt Lois. It's sort of a Navy thing. And I look at Uncle Bert's ring, and it said 27. And this was 1968. I used to think, 41 years. He is old. I didn't think anybody could be that old. And now, this October, I'm going to my 45th Naval Academy. And I'm not old. So it's interesting how those perspectives change over the years. But I actually looked at pictures of Uncle Bert at my graduation. He was old. Our generation is a little different, I think. But you did speak about the fact that I was very fortunate in that I'm the only person I know who served in all 4 of the major fleets. When I was an ensign, my first ship was out of Norfolk, and I was fortunate. In my first ship, we did 2 Mediterranean deployments. And this was in 1972, and then we did a deployment in '73, and that was a great time to do med deployments. But things have changed so much. Because I remember my first ship, I was the navigator. And it was a small ship. It was a brand new LST. And there was only, I think, 8 officers on board, 9 officers. And they made me the navigator. I'd gone to Annapolis, and so they assumed I knew some navigation. My mother was petrified because she knew I could get lost going to the post office. and they were making me a navigator of a ship. And in those days, we didn't have satellites. anything except the stars and the moon. So in 1972, we were still navigating the same way they had navigated 100 years before. You know, I'd get up early in the morning with my chief. I had to stand watch, my chief didn't. So, but I would get up early in the morning and shoot stars with my chief, and we'd shoot evening stars, and we'd do local parent noon, and we would do all this navigation. We'd be in the chart house, and Thomas Patrick O'Rourke, I'll never forget him, because he was this amazingly colorful Irish guy who was a chief petty officer. And one thing I really learned a lot in the Navy was from my chiefs. I remember Uncle Bert, when I was a midshipman, Uncle Bert used to tell me, always take care of your chiefs, and your chiefs will take care of you. And he really taught me to be very respectful of the chief petty officers. And I had so many incredible chief petty officers. I remember when I was a lieutenant, I was a chief engineer of a guided missile destroyer. I had 160 people in the engineering department. It was a big ship. And I had 2 master chiefs. And both of them had been in the Navy since before I was born. And they were salty. One was a Master Chief BT. You know what a BT is? Yeah. The other was a Master Chief Machinist Mate. And I still remember the wisdom of those chiefs. I remember I had this sailor, and I thought this sailor had a lot of potential. But my Master Chief BT that he worked for was like, no. The kid had been in trouble over and over and over. I still remember sitting in my stateroom with my Master Chief. You never give an order to a Master Chief. You just try to get him to maybe agree with you. And because I was just a lieutenant. Commanding officers don't get orders to Master Chiefs. But I remember sitting with the Master Chief and I saying, Master Chief, I really think this kid's got potential. And the Master Chief's sitting there, nope. And finally, I remember the Master Chief looking me in the eye and saying, Lieutenant, he said, I'm a Master Chief Petty Officer in this man's Navy. He said, I've been in the Navy for 34 years. He said, I can make a whole lot out of just a little bit. He said, even I can't shine shit. And so I said, okay, Master Chief, we'll bottom blow him. So we discharged him. So, you know, I learned a lot of wisdom from those chief petty officers over the years. But that was my first ship out of Norfolk, and I did 2 deployments on that. And then I wanted to go into destroyers, so I was able to get a job as I applied, and I said I wanted to go to a destroyer, so I got a job as fire control officer, missile fire control officer in a guided missile destroyer, the USS Sampson, which was DDG-10. And I had to go to Mare Island for school for 6 weeks to learn how some of the computer systems worked on that ship, primitive by today's standards. So I went to Mare Island for 6 or 8 weeks, and then I moved to Athens, Greece, because at that time we had 6 destroyers home ported in Athens. That was an incredible experience because we had no base. We had to live in the economy. So I was there for almost 3 years, and I remember waking up one morning with the house shaking. But I looked out the window, and there was tanks going down the street because they were having the revolution in Athens. So we all had to get to our ships in sortie and get the ships out of Athens. And we went to France until the revolution for a few weeks until everything settled down, and we came back to Athens. So I ended up home ported out of Norfolk, out of the 2nd Fleet, and I was in the 6th Fleet. And then I went to I went to the Pentagon for a tour. I was a surface missile systems officer for the OPO-3, and then I got orders to be the chief engineer of a ship out of Long Beach. So then I did my Long Beach out of the 6th Fleet. Out of the 5th Fleet in Long Beach, and then later I was on Concruit as Group 5 out of San Diego, and then I was home porting Yokosuka, Japan for 4 years, where I was a chief engineer, and I was also the material officer for ComDes Run 15. So I was on a battle group commander staff, a destroyer squadron's commander staff. I was on ships on both coasts of the United States and Athens, Greece, and Yokosuka, Japan. So I was fortunate to have a lot of really incredible experiences. Some of them were really incredible. I remember, I wrote these dates down so I wouldn't forget them, although I do remember them very distinctly. I remember I was on the Concrete Group 15 staff, and we were with the Midway Battle Group. We all know the Midway. Everybody knows the Midway as a museum. I knew the Midway as our flagship out of Yokosuka. So we had been in the Persian Gulf, just on a routine Persian Gulf deployment out of Yokosuka, with 3 of our destroyers in the Midway, and we were on our way to Perth, Australia for a port visit. And we were almost to Perth, and we got a flash message saying, turn around to the battle group commander saying, and I was on the Commodore staff, so I saw it immediately. Port visit canceled, turn around and go immediately to the coast of Iran. The embassy has been seized. So we went back to the coast of Iran and spent the next 155 days off the coast of Iran, which was quite an interesting experience, because then the Nimitz, I think it was the Nimitz came in, because we had our Commodore, we had the carrier, the Midway, but they needed a real admiral there. So they brought in an admiral, but he had to bring his big carrier. So we ended up with 36 ships off the coast of Iran. And so and I was assistant material officer, so I was charged of keeping all the parts for all the weapon systems and engineering systems for these 36 ships off the coast of Iran. And we had not planned this. And it was a very, very challenging time. I remember that Christmas, right after the embassy was taken, we were supposed to have been home by Christmas, and we weren't. We didn't get home for another 4 months. We were 4 months late getting back, but that happens in the Navy. But I remember they said that was Christmas, and they said because of all of the parts that had to be shipped there for all these ships that were suddenly unexpectedly there, we were home ported in Japan, and they told all the wives that there was very little room on the supply ships coming to the Persian Gulf for the hostage crisis, but they allowed each wife to pack one shoebox. So that Christmas, all the sailors in the destroyer squadron and the Midway from Yokosuka got one shoebox for Christmas. And the wives and families packed it with our little fun things we had to have. And I remember there was one of our lieutenants whose wife did not like the Navy, and she wanted him to get out, and she had a baby while we were gone. He was supposed to be home by the time the baby was born, and obviously we didn't make it back. So all of us got these nice little shoe boxes from our friends and family with smoked almonds and all kinds of stuff. He got a shoe box with a dirty diaper in it. So one of my fun Navy stories. But we spent 155 days off the coast of Iran for that, and I'll never forget that, because I was actually in Combat Information Center with the Admiral as we were monitoring the radio traffic during Operation Eagle Claw, which was when President Carter attempted to rescue the hostages from the embassy, and we were hearing the collisions, we were hearing the crashes. Actually, the helicopters flew off of our ship. So we were right in the middle of that. So I was there with a little bit of history being made. And the next time I was somewhere where history was being made was on April 14th, 1988. I was the executive officer of the USS Gary, and we were on a routine, we were escorting ships in and out of the Persian Gulf, because the Straits of Hormuz, we were escorting the ships, making sure that they weren't attacked. And the oil was continuing to get out of the Persian Gulf to get to the United States. And about that time, on April the 14th, 1988, when President Reagan was president, the Samuel B. Roberts hit a mine. The Iranians had mined the Straits, which was against international law. So 4 days later, I was with the captain called me up to his cabin, and he showed me a top secret flash message, and we were ordered to attack the Iranian Navy. So over the next few days, our ship was told to go with flank speed up to the northwest corner of the Persian Gulf, and the other ships were just to stay in the center of the Persian Gulf, and then at a certain point, the other ships there were to blow up all the oil derricks in the Persian Gulf and sink the Iranian Navy. And we sank about 2/3 of the Iranian Navy in about 2 days. It was a big challenge, frankly. And our challenge though, is there was 2 barges, and if you look this up, it's all called Operation Praying Mantis, and there's a lot about it on the internet and in books now. There's a book called The Tanker Wars, which has a whole chapter about my ship that I was executive officer on. I was the commander at the time. And there was 2 barges up in the northwest Persian Gulf which had spooks on it and snake eaters. Those of you who are in the Navy know what spooks and snake eaters are. They were CLUBTs and intelligence people. And they were these big barges that were floating out in the Persian Gulf, and we were supposed to protect them because they knew as soon as we started attacking the Iranian Navy, the Iranians were going to attack these barges because they knew they were there. And so our job was to protect them. And I remember we were there protecting these barges, and suddenly we get a flash message and communications from Washington saying the war warning us that they had seen signals that the Iranians were bringing up Chinese Silkworm missiles firing site on the coast. And they said, you know, the alert for an attack on your ship. And not too long after that, because the captain and I just remember being in the captain's cabin, and we basically said, this is it. You know, we're probably not going to be alive in another 6 hours. So we're watching very carefully, you know, all of our intelligence, and we get this flash message saying the Iranians have fired 2 Chinese missiles, 2 Chinese Silkworm missiles. These are missiles with a 2,000-pound warhead. And if you're a guided missile frigate, one of those, you know, 2,000 pounds of high explosive, you're toast. But I still remember the captain, as those of you who are in the Navy, you know, during battle, the captain is in Combat Information Center and the executive officer is on the bridge. So I was on the bridge and the captain just said, avoid, you know, he told me to make best speed and do basic courses. So I was doing 26 knots and we were going like this all over the place. The trouble is there was rocks and shoals here and there, so I was having to be very careful that we didn't go aground because that would have been really bad. At the same time, I was having to maneuver at high speed, and at the same time he was firing the weapons from Combat Information Center. I'll never forget that day. Is in my head like a videotape. But I know it's nothing compared to what people in World War II went through, but this was for us, this was relatively a big deal. But I still remember we were back there, we're maneuvering around in the Persian Gulf trying to keep from getting hit. So those of you who are in the Navy would appreciate this, but in the Navy or you know, firemen here will appreciate this. In the Navy, safety is number one. You know, safety, safety, safety. And we have these things called chaff rockets. And they shoot chaff up from the signal bridge. And when we would practice shooting, you know, once a quarter, we'd shoot off maybe 2 chaff rounds. They look about this big, and they go up, and all this aluminum goes in the air to try to divert missiles coming at you. Well, whenever we would do that, we'd go out in the middle of nowhere, and we'd make sure there was no ships within 20 miles, and we would put yellow tape around the signal bridge, and the signalman would put load the chaff launchers, then an officer would go make sure that nobody was near them, and then from the bridge we would launch the chaff. That's how we practiced. Well, that day we were launching every chaff round we had, and the signalman had no eyelashes and no hair when this was over because they were up there dropping the chaff into the launchers. On the bridge, we were pushing the launch button, so they were just going woof, 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 right in their faces. And so this chaff, we had clouds of chaff on both sides of us. And I still remember I was on the bridge, and the captain said there was missile inbound, so I got on the 1MC and I passed the word missile inbound. And what happened shortly after that, I heard the surface-to-air missiles go off. They have a range of 26 miles. So we were trying to hit a missile with a missile, which is not easy because as the missile's coming into you, it's a very short. If it's sideways, it's easier to hit. If it's coming right at you, it's a very small cross-section, so it's hard to hit a missile with a missile. And so we fired about 8 or 10 missiles, so I heard missiles going whoosh, 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 whoosh. And shortly after that, because Dallas and the captain and I weren't talking that much because we were both busy. And then I heard the 3-inch guns going, boom, 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 boom. So I knew that it was close because it was within gun range. And this is a pretty big missile. Well, shortly after that, one of the 2,000-pound warheads landed right behind us and blew up. And the other one, I don't know how many of you know what a Vulcan phalanx is. You know, they still have CWIS? It's called CWIS, Close-In Weapon Systems. Navy still has them. They're these big things. They look like a big R2-D2 from the movies, you know, in Star Wars. But these sit on both quarters. On a smaller ship like a frigate, you have 2, one on each quarter, and larger ships you have them amidships and you have them on the stern. These are the weapon of last resort. You don't control them. And they shoot 50 caliber machine gun rounds with spent uranium bullets, because the spent uranium is very, very heavy and it will pierce a nuclear warhead. And they shoot 3,000 rounds a minute. I think they're very fast. And it's just whoosh, and you don't control them. But if you are in danger, you turn them on. And they have an automatic target acquisition system in them. And if they see something, they shoot it down. You have no control. So you don't turn this on unless you really, really, really need it. And because you don't want any friendly aircraft or anything nearby. But they don't acquire until 50 yards away. So they don't, so until something's 50, when it hits 50 yards, the system will automatically lock on it, and then it will start shooting these rounds. Well, I heard the CWIS go off, which meant that this 2,000-pound warhead was within 50 yards of the ship. And so when the CWIS started going, I thought this is the last chance. And I grabbed the 1MC and I passed the word, all hands brace for missile impact port side, because I knew which direction it was coming from, because the port side CWIS was attacking it. And we blew it out of the air, and we saved the ship. So what was really interesting was we got a message from the Navy, and it said, make best speed Bahrain, which is the opposite end of the Persian Gulf. So we also had orders not to go over 5 knots because there was all these mines in the Persian Gulf. And if you went slow, our normal standard procedure was to go slowly, and we'd have guys on the bow with rifles, and if we saw a mine, we would stop and then we'd shoot it and blow it up. But they told us to make best speed. So here, one side they're telling us don't get hit by a mine, so don't go over 5 knots, and then when they're going, go 26 knots back to Bahrain. So we got back to Bahrain, and when we got there, there was all these suits on the pier, and they were CIA. And the CIA came on board, and they took our logs, and they briefed us, and they said, this never happened. They said this was an act of war by Iran, and the president does not want this to become public. So we told our crew what they told us, and everything was buried, and we were told never tell anybody this happened. Because if it had become public knowledge, it would have really required us to declare war on Iran, and President Reagan didn't want to do that. So it was actually classified for 25 years or so, until recently it was declassified on like the 25th anniversary. This happened in 1988. So about 25 years later it was declassified. And now there's actually a book out about this and what happened that day. It talks about all the details of what happened that day. So that was probably the most interesting day in my Navy career. And I almost wasn't here to talk to you guys today because of that. So I was very fortunate in that I had some really interesting things happening to me while I was in the Navy. And but then moved to the next phase of my life. When I retired, my last job in the Navy, I was the Chief Information Officer for the Office of Naval Research and Development, where I ran all the IT information technology systems for all the Navy's R&D laboratories. And so that was a really great job, and I really enjoyed it. So then I had the opportunity to retire and go into the corporate world doing the same thing for like 6 times as much money. So I actually made that decision to retire, and I became an IT executive in 3 large global corporations where I ran large information technology systems. And as a result of that, I was traveling, throughout the world for a number of years. Then when I turned 60, I thought, or 61, I thought I was going to China 6 or 8 times a year. We had offices in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, Taipei, Paris, and London, and I was always on the road. And I had a house here since 2001, and I just said, this is enough is enough. So I retired and decided to just sit around and enjoy Palm Springs. And then a couple of years later, I decided to run for mayor. So you never know. Once you've got that Navy, thing, you always want something to do. We're not good just sitting in dry dock. So, but what I think what's sort of interesting is for all of you who are Navy is you realize that here I was a 17-year-old kid from Arkansas. My brother and sister have never left there. My brother retired as a captain in the fire department back home, and my sister retired as a federal U.S. Marshal. She was actually the first police officer in the state of Arkansas, the first female police officer in the state of Arkansas. And then she, after 7 or 8 years of that, she became a federal U.S. Marshal, but she still was assigned to Little Rock, although she traveled around quite a bit because of that. But you can't get them out of Arkansas with dynamite. But so I don't know what would have happened to me if I'm going to my 50th high school reunion this June, so I'm going to see what happened to all my classmates who I went to high school with. Probably most of them don't have any teeth and no hair in their lips. But I'm going to go back there and see what maybe would have happened to me if I had not gone to Annapolis, if I had not gone in the Navy, if I had not seen the world, and if I had not had these opportunities, and I had not had this education the Navy provided me through the Naval Academy, where I got my bachelor's in engineering, and then numerous schools in information technology and engineering, all the schools I went to, and all the technical knowledge I gained, and the experience I gained, and most importantly, the leadership I gained. I mean, there's no graduate school anywhere in the world. You can go to Harvard Business School, but they can teach management, but they can't teach leadership. Leadership is something you have to learn by doing, I think. And you have to have, I think, the mentality to do it. But the Navy brings that out in you. So the Navy had me from the time I was 18. And for your first day at Annapolis, they teach you about honor and integrity and getting the job done and completing the mission and working hard. So that was something that always stuck through me. That's why I think I was successful not only in the Navy, but in the corporate world, and now, you know, in my first political job as the mayor of Palm Springs, which, and the reason I decided to run for mayor of Palm Springs is my predecessor. Somebody said, this gentleman over here said, "Are you that mayor I've been reading about in the paper that's going to jail?" And I said, "No, that was the previous mayor, not me." But I knew the former mayor, of course, quite well, but he actually, I didn't really think the job he was doing was, the people of Palm Springs, I felt they deserved better. And so I decided, you know, he had won the previous election with 65% of the vote. I thought, and everybody thought he was untouchable. Sort of like Hillary thought, I guess. But he thought he was untouchable. So I hate to think of myself as the Donald Trump of Palm Springs, but I thought, well, I'm going to go up against him anyway, because even if I don't win, I can bring these issues out to the public that I think he's not doing right. And although other people in the campaign raised a lot of public money, I funded my own campaign. I spent $65,000 of my own money to run for mayor. But because I didn't want to be it's a Navy thing. You know, I felt if I take money from this person and I win, then they're going to think I owe them something. So I thought, I can afford it. I'm just going to pay for my own rights. And so I did. But then about 3 months after I started the campaign, articles started coming out in the paper about the mayor, and that there was possible conflicts of interest, some possible bribery, some possible this. And then 6 months after I started my campaign in March 2015, and in September of 2015, the FBI, the IRS, and the district attorney raided City Hall. Like, hey, what am I getting myself into? So, and as it turned out, there was 8 of us running for mayor, and I won with 50% more votes than the next person who ran, who actually was Jenny Folk, who'd been on the council for 12 years. And she spent $403,000 of which none of it was her money. And she raised a lot of money from developers and other people to run for mayor. But that's the lesson. What I'm sort of pointing out here is, you know, the Navy has influenced my entire life from the time I was 18 and went to Annapolis up until today. Everything I do is that Navy, what the Navy instilled in me, and as far as integrity and in fact, when I was running for mayor, I was advised to pick 3 words, keep it simple. You know the Navy principle, keep it simple? Keep it simple, and I was advised to pick out 3 words and 1 short motto. And so I picked out 3 words I would build my entire campaign on, and it was integrity, transparency, and commitment. You know, that could be the Navy, right? And the motto is a full-time mayor for a full-time city. And so that's what I ran on. So a lot of people, one thing we've really been working on is to keep things moving and to get past these problems that we've had. And nobody's been indicted for anything yet. I mean, I'm sorry, they have been indicted, nobody's been found guilty. I wouldn't take any bets on this, but nobody's yet been found guilty. But we're trying to move beyond that and move beyond the perception of things. A couple people asked me questions today, which shows how, you know, the desperate scum, the desert sun, sometimes gets things a little incorrectly. I mean, like for instance, the downtown development project, which is moving along quite well, that is still moving along quite well. We just published this week online a timeline of when everything's going to be done. And I've been insisting on this for a long time, and they finally did it. When I was a naval engineer, I remember doing it. I was the officer in charge of the cruise portion of a Navy ship overhaul. If you've ever seen a Navy ship overhaul, you know you have to have timelines and milestones. So I said we need to publish timelines so people know what's happening. So there's now a timeline online for everything that's going on downtown and when it's going to be completed. We've also put online about 3,000 pages of documents documenting every agreement we have with the developer on this downtown. So everything is online now for people to look at if they want to. But we're moving along quite well. At downtown right now, the Kempton Hotel, which is the big hotel, is due to be finished on August 29th. And then the Kempton people will take it over. They'll start moving in. It'll take them 4 to 6 weeks to get it fitted out. And then after that, they should all get underway sometime in late September, early October. And the buildings you see, if you're in Palm Springs, going up on Palm Canyon, those are all going to be finished in June and July, and they'll start, our tenants, their tenants will start moving in, and those tenants should be in business by the fall. And we have Tony Bahamas coming in there. Starbucks is moving across the street into this big thing called a Starbucks 900 or something. It's a big Starbucks where they have extra food. And actually, at this Starbucks at 9 in the morning, if you don't want coffee, you can get a glass of wine. So it's going to be a great, big, really nice Starbucks. H&M clothing store is going in there, and we have a lot of really great retailers coming in downtown. So it's really going to be a great step forward for Palm Springs. And one thing I'm very proud of is I led the council. Well, the whole council wanted to do this, but as the mayor, I was leading the council, and this is too much downtown. So the first thing we did, we were sworn in December of 2015, and in March of 2016, we had a public meeting at the convention center with the Planning Commission, the City Council, and the Architectural Advisory Commission. We went through every line of 128 pages of the downtown plan, and in public, we discussed every item in that, and we cut it down by half. So that downtown right now is half of what it was supposed to be. Another thing we did is right across from the downtown, which is where the Town and Country Center is. Those of you who live in Palm Springs know it. It was built in 1948 to 1951, and it was the first modern building in Palm Springs. And John Westman bought it. He's just letting it fall apart now. But we actually, his plan was, and this previous council approved for him to be able to bulldoze that, build the street all the way through it, put 60-foot buildings on that lot. So we actually declared it historic, so we couldn't do that. So we have really brought down what's going to be happening downtown Palm Springs, because like anything else, when you're managing a city like Palm Springs, we like to say Palm Springs is like no place else, and it is. It's different. You know, all of our sister cities in the valley, we're all unique, and we have our own personalities. The Canada, Coachella, Palm Desert, Desert Hot Springs. Everybody's different, and we're just different. Palm Springs has this sort of village feel, because we have the downtown. We've been there for a long time. And in fact, this Sunday morning, on Easter morning, I'm going to be participating in the Easter sunrise service, which will be our 100th Easter sunrise service in Palm Springs. So we've been there for a long time. So it's really difficult, though, to maintain that balance between keeping the feel that our residents want in Palm Springs, as the village feel, at the same time growing and prospering and bringing in the revenue we have to bring in. Because right now, this past year, just our fire and police was $43 million. And that's more than the budget of most of the other cities in the Coachella Valley. But we have our own police force. And also, Palm Springs is a larger city. It's got 45,000 residents, but actually we have 100,000 because of the snowbirds, and we love the snowbirds. And when we have special events, we have 250,000 to 350,000 people in Palm Springs. So we have to have a fairly sizable police force because of this. And we have the convention center, and we have the airport. So we have a lot of things that the other cities don't have. And we also have the tribe in the middle of downtown. So we have a lot of things that a lot of other cities don't have to contend with. And also, California, as everyone knows, is really facing some serious budget crises. I just spoke to Sheriff Stan Sniff recently. He spoke at an organization I belong to. I'm not selling anything that's not public. And like we're spending $650 million to build a new jail in Indio. Beautiful jail. But they've now recently cut his budget by another $40 million for personnel. So when that jail opens, they're going to have to put it in mothballs because they cannot afford one single person to work there. So we're going to have a $650 million jail with nobody there because the county of Riverside can't afford to run it. They can't afford to staff it. And also, we all know what's happening in the state of California financially. And so, like this past year, our retirement benefits that we have to pay to what's called CalPERS in the city of Palm Springs was $14 million into the retirement system. And over the next 3 years, it's projected to go to $21 million because CalPERS is not making very much money on their investments, and so they're taking more money from the cities. So, you know, just between those two items, that's $65 million. And so it's really, really difficult to run a city when you have so many these things that are like the defense budget in the U.S. I mean, it takes a huge hunk right off the top, but you have to do it. And so it's a challenging job, but you know, because of the background that I have from Annapolis and from my 26 years in the Navy, I'm not afraid of this challenge. I actually welcome this challenge. And I know it's sort of like when I left, every time I would leave a ship, although it was sad to leave the ship, I could look back and think, you know, somebody else comes in and they take over and things move on. But I know when I leave, being my time as mayor, I can look back and say, at least when I was mayor, I did the best job I could do, and I moved us forward, just like I did when I was a chief engineer and executive officer and everything I did in the Navy. So that's why I really enjoy this job, because, I mean, where else but Palm Springs would somebody who's 66 years old decide to run for office for the first time, you know? And people are already asking me, you gonna run for re-election? I'm gonna be 70 when my term is up. I mean, you know, but I probably will. So that's one great thing about Palm Springs is, you know, we old sailors, we just keep going. So, but anybody have any particular questions on the downtown or anything? Yes.